Who's the scariest person you've ever met? My dad is a retired police officer, and he once told me about a case he worked on in the 90s that still haunts him. They arrested a man named Leonard for breaking and entering, but when they searched his house, they found something much worse. Leonard had been breaking into homes for years, but he wasn't stealing anything. He would slip in while families were asleep and just watch them. He kept notebooks where he documented everything: the layout of their homes, the names of family members, their schedules, what they ate, what they watched on TV. He would take tiny items as souvenirs: a photo, a piece of jewelry, a child's toy. In one house, he even rearranged the furniture while the family slept. They woke up to find their living room completely different, but they had no idea someone had been in their home. Leonard had videos too. He would set up cameras and record families for hours, just watching them live their lives. My dad said that when they interviewed Leonard, he showed no remorse at all. He said he liked feeling like he was part of their lives, like he was invisible, like he could be anywhere he wanted. When they asked him why he did it, he said, "Because I can. Because they never knew I was there." And that made me powerful. The case gained national attention because Leonard had victimized more than 40 families across 3 states, some for years, without ever being caught. Families watched the videos and saw him standing in their hallways while they slept, standing in their children's rooms, just staring. The psychological damage was immense. People moved out of their homes, installed security systems. Some never felt safe again. Leonard is still in prison, serving multiple life sentences. But my dad said the thing that scared him the most was how normal Leonard seemed. He had a job, friends, a girlfriend. Nobody suspected anything, and he probably would have kept going forever if he hadn't made one mistake and tripped a silent alarm. When I was 16, I got a summer job at a local restaurant as a dishwasher. The kitchen manager was this guy named Rick, probably in his late 40s. He was quiet and kept to himself, but there was something about him that made everyone uneasy. He had these cold, dead eyes that never seemed to blink, and when he looked at you, it felt like he was staring through you, not at you. One day, I was taking out the trash to the dumpster in the back alley, and Rick followed me out. I figured he was going out for a smoke or something, but he just stood there watching me. I said, "Hey Rick, what's up?" He didn't respond. He just stared, expressionless. I finished tossing the trash and started walking past him to go back inside. That's when he grabbed my arm. His grip was so tight it actually hurt. He leaned in close and whispered, "Do you know what it feels like to watch the light leave someone's eyes?" I froze. I had no idea how to respond. He said, "I do. I've seen it more times than I can count, and every time, it's beautiful." I yanked my arm away and ran inside. I went straight to the owner and told him exactly what Rick had said. The owner looked concerned and told me he'd talked to Rick, but nothing changed. Rick kept working there like everything was normal. I started avoiding him completely, but he would always manage to corner me in the walk-in freezer, the storage room, wherever he could get me alone. He never touched me again, but he'd say things like, "You'd be so easy to make disappear," or, "I wonder what you'd look like scared." Really scared. I quit after 2 weeks. I couldn't handle it anymore. About 6 months later, I was watching the news, and Rick's face appeared on the screen. He'd been arrested for murder. They found the remains of 3 people buried in his backyard, all of them young men around my age. The reporter said police believed there might be more victims. The owner of the restaurant was interviewed. He said he had no idea that Rick had always been a quiet employee. When I saw that report, I felt sick. I realized how close I had come to being one of his victims. I still have nightmares about his eyes and the way he looked at me like I was already dead. I worked at a veterinary clinic when I was in college, and we had a client named Mr. Walsh who brought his dog in regularly for checkups. The dog was sweet and well behaved, but Mr. Walsh always gave me a bad feeling. He lingered after appointments and asked personal questions: when I worked, where I lived. I tried to stay polite but keep my distance. One day, Mr. Walsh came in without an appointment. claiming his dog had eaten something toxic. We took the dog back immediately, and I assisted the vet. The dog was perfectly fine, nothing wrong at all. When we told Mr. Walsh, he looked disappointed. He said, "Are you sure? Can't you keep him overnight for observation?" The vet told him it wasn't necessary, and Mr. Walsh looked straight at me and said, "Well, I guess I'll have to find another reason to come back." A few weeks later, I was closing the clinic alone. It was around 8 p.m, and as I was locking up, I saw Mr. Walsh's car in the parking lot. He was just sitting there, watching the building. I called my co-worker and asked her to stay on the phone with me while I walked to my car. When I stepped outside, Mr. Walsh got out of his car and started walking toward me. I yelled that I was on the phone with the police, which I wasn't, and he stopped. He said, "I just wanted to talk to you." I ran to my car and drove straight to the police station. I filed a report, and the police went to talk to him. What they found at his house was horrifying. He had an entire room dedicated to me. Photos of me taken outside the clinic, outside my apartment, at the grocery store. He had my work schedule printed out, maps with my daily routes marked, and a written plan, step by step, describing how he would break into my apartment, what he would do to me, and how he'd dispose of my body. The police arrested him, and he's currently serving time for stalking and attempted kidnapping. The prosecutor told me that if I hadn't noticed him that night, if I hadn't run, he probably would have followed through with his plan. What haunts me is how normal he seemed. Just a regular client with a dog. I never would have suspected what he was capable of. I used to be a flight attendant, and on one flight from Denver to Atlanta, there was a passenger in first class named Dr. Reynolds. He was well-dressed, polite, and had that distinguished older gentleman vibe. Most first-class passengers were business travelers or families, but Dr. Reynolds was alone. About halfway through the flight, he called me over and asked for a glass of water. When I brought it to him, he gently grabbed my wrist and said, "You have beautiful bone structure, very symmetrical." I pulled my hand back, said thank you, and walked away, trying to chalk it up as an awkward compliment. But then he kept calling me over for little things, another napkin, a magazine, a blanket, and each time he made another comment about my appearance, but always in this clinical, detached way, like he was studying me. He said things like, "Your clavicle is perfectly aligned," and "Your facial symmetry is rare." I told the senior flight attendant, and she said to just avoid him and let someone else handle first class. But then, Dr. Reynolds got up to use the bathroom. On his way back, he stopped beside me and asked if I'd ever considered modeling for medical research. He said he worked at a private research facility, and they were always looking for specimens with ideal anatomy. The word specimens made my skin crawl. I told him no, and he handed me his business card. "If you change your mind," he said, "we pay very well." When we landed, I mentioned it to airport security as a weird interaction, but didn't think much more of it, until 2 weeks later, when I saw Dr. Reynolds' face on the news. He'd been arrested on federal charges. The report said he'd been running an illegal operation buying bodies for research, but he was also linked to the disappearance of several women. The FBI found a storage unit rented under his name that contained remains, medical equipment, and photos of women. Some of the photos were candid shots taken on airplanes, trains, buses. All of them had notes describing bone structure and measurements. I realized I could have been one of those photos, or worse. The FBI contacted me to ask about my interaction with him, and the agent told me I was lucky he hadn't had time to escalate. They believed he had been selecting victims based on their physical attributes, and that he'd been doing it for over a decade. When I was 21, I got an apartment with a girl I met through a roommate-finding website. Her name was Vanessa, and she seemed perfect on her profile. Young professional, clean, non-smoker. We met for coffee before signing the lease, and she was charming, funny, easy to talk to. The first month honestly thought I'd lucked out, but then I started noticing things going missing. Small stuff at first, a necklace, my favorite coffee mug, a book. I confronted Vanessa, and she acted shocked, even helped me look for the items. We never found them. Then my mail started disappearing. I was expecting a new credit card, and it never arrived. The post office said it had been delivered. I asked Vanessa if she'd seen it, and she said no. A week later, I found the opened envelope in her room, buried in her trash. I confronted her again, and she broke down crying. She said she had a shopping addiction and had used my card to buy things online. She promised she'd pay me back, and like an idiot, I believed her. I cancelled the card, but didn't report her because she seemed genuinely remorseful. Then things got darker. I came home early from work one day and heard noises coming from my bedroom. I opened the door and Vanessa was in there going through my closet, trying on my clothes. She was wearing my dress, my shoes, even my jewelry. She looked at me in the mirror, smiled, and said, "Don't you think we could be twins?" Her voice was higher, like she was trying to imitate me. I told her to get out, and she just kept staring at me through the mirror, saying, "But I look so much better as you, don't I?" I called the police, and when they searched her room, they found a shrine dedicated to me. She had printed out hundreds of photos of me from social media, some of them edited so her face was photoshopped onto my body. She had a journal where she wrote entries pretending to be me, describing my life as if she were living it. The police told me it was one of the most extreme cases of obsessive behavior they'd ever seen. Vanessa was arrested and sent to a psychiatric facility. But she's out now, still living in the same city. I see her sometimes around town, and every time she smiles at me like we're old friends. I had to change my phone number, delete all my social media, everything. And even now, I still don't feel safe. My mum worked as a social worker for 20 years, and she once told me about a case that made her quit. A family had called asking for help with their teenage son, Ethan. They said he was becoming increasingly violent toward animals and his younger siblings. My mum went to their home to do an assessment. When she met Ethan, he was polite, articulate, and looked like a completely normal 15-year-old. But something about him was off. His affect was totally flat. No emotion in his voice, nothing in his eyes. During the assessment, my mum asked him about the incidents with animals. He described, in graphic detail, how he killed the family cat. He talked about it like he was describing a science experiment, clinical, detached. He said he wanted to see how long it would take for it to stop moving. My mum asked if he felt bad about it, and he said, "No, why would I? It was just a cat." My mum recommended immediate psychiatric intervention, and the family agreed to get Ethan into treatment. But before that could happen, Ethan's younger brother ended up in the hospital with a broken arm and severe bruising. The boy said Ethan had pushed him down the stairs on purpose. Ethan was removed from the home and placed in a juvenile psychiatric facility. A few weeks later, my mum visited him there for a follow-up. During the meeting, Ethan asked her very calmly if she had any children. My mum said yes, she had 2. Ethan smiled and said, "I bet they're really trusting, aren't they? Kids always trust their parents. They never see it coming." My mum walked out immediately and reported the interaction. Ethan stayed in the facility until he turned 18. Then he was released. My mum said the system failed. He never showed any real improvement. He just learned what to say, what expressions to mimic. The facility let him go because they had no legal grounds to keep him. My mum quit her job 6 months later. She said she couldn't sleep knowing Ethan was out there and that he'd asked about her kids. Years later, she saw his name in the news. Ethan had been arrested for attacking a young woman in a parking lot. She survived, but Ethan told police he'd been planning it for years, that he'd been practicing restraint, waiting for the right opportunity. I used to work at a library, and we had a regular patron named Frank who came in almost every day. He was middle-aged, quiet, and always polite. He'd check out books, mostly true crime and history, and he'd sit in the same corner spot, reading for hours. All of us on staff knew him, and we all assumed he was harmless. One day, I was shelving books in the back section when I noticed Frank standing at the end of the aisle, just watching me. I said, "Hey Frank, finding everything okay?" He said, "I like watching you work. You're very methodical." It struck me as strange but I thanked him and kept shelving. When I turned back around, he was gone. A few weeks later, my co-worker mentioned that Frank had asked her about me, what my schedule was, whether I was single. She told him she couldn't share that information, and he said, "That's okay. I already know." I started paying a lot more attention after that. I realized Frank was always there when I was working. If I had a morning shift, he'd show up in the morning. If I worked evenings, he'd come in the evening. I mentioned it to my supervisor, and she said she'd talk to him. The next day, Frank came in, and my supervisor pulled him aside. I watched from a distance. He seemed calm, nodding, smiling, but when he left, he looked at me with an expression that made my blood run cold. It was pure rage. That night, as I was leaving work, I saw Frank's car parked across the street. I called the police. They talked to him, but he told them he was just reading in his car and that it was a public street. There wasn't anything they could do. After that, I had a co-worker walk me to my car every night. About a week later, Frank stopped coming to the library. I thought it was over. Then my supervisor called me on my day off. She said the police had contacted her. They'd arrested Frank at another library in a neighboring town. He'd been following a librarian there too. When they searched his car, they found zip ties, duct tape, a knife, and a detailed plan. He had notes about both me and the other librarian, our schedules, our cars, even where we lived. The officer said Frank had been planning to abduct one of us. He'd been waiting for the right opportunity. I had to testify at his trial, and sitting in that courtroom seeing him in handcuffs was surreal, because he still looked like a completely normal guy, someone you'd pass on the street without a second thought. Frank is in prison now, but I can never look at library patrons the same way again. When I was in my early 20s, I briefly dated a guy named Owen, whom I met at a friend's party. He was charming, good-looking, and seemed like he had his life together. We went on a few dates, and everything seemed normal, until I noticed he would show up places where I was, even though I hadn't told him I'd be there. I'd be at the grocery store, and he'd suddenly appear in the same aisle. I'd go to a coffee shop, and he'd walk in a few minutes later. When I asked him about it, he'd shrug and say, "What a coincidence," or, "I was in the neighborhood." After the third time, I ended things. I told him I didn't think we were compatible, and he acted reasonable about it. He said, "Okay, I understand. No hard feelings." But then the texts started. Dozens of them every day. Messages asking why I didn't want to see him anymore. Saying he could change. Insisting we were meant to be together. I blocked his number, but he used different numbers and texting apps. I blocked him on social media, and he made fake accounts. When I told him to leave me alone, he said, "I just want to talk. I miss you." One night, I came home to find him sitting on the front steps of my apartment building. He said he needed closure, that he deserved an explanation. I told him I was calling the police, and he grabbed me by the shoulders and said, "You don't get to just throw me away like I'm nothing." His grip was tight enough to bruise. A neighbor heard me yelling and came outside, and Owen finally let go and walked away. I filed a restraining order, but he violated it multiple times, showing up at my work, at my gym, even at my friends' houses. Each time the police would arrest him, he'd spend a night in jail and then be released. Eventually, a judge ordered him to attend mandatory counseling and stay away from me for 5 years. I thought it was over. Then, a detective called me. Owen had been arrested for breaking into the apartment of his new ex-girlfriend. He'd installed cameras in her bedroom, her bathroom, her living room, everywhere, and had been watching her for months. When they searched his apartment, they found footage of me too, from when we dated. He had hidden cameras in his own apartment and recorded us without my knowledge. The detective told me Owen had videos of at least 6 different women, every one of them an ex, all filmed without consent. Owen is in prison now, but I still check over my shoulder. I cover my laptop camera. I look for hidden devices whenever I'm in a new place. Knowing he watched me when I thought I was alone still makes my stomach twist. I used to work at a psychiatric hospital as a nurse, and one patient I'll never forget was a woman named Helen. She was in her 60s, admitted for severe delusions and violent outbursts. On paper, She seemed like a typical case. But there was something about her that went beyond mental illness, something genuinely unsettling. Helen never slept. I worked the night shift, and every hour I'd check on her. Every single time, she was awake. She'd sit upright in her bed, staring at the door like she was waiting for someone. She didn't talk to anyone except in whispers, and whenever she did speak, it was always about the children. She said the children told her things, told her what to do, told her who deserved to be punished. One night, I was doing my rounds. I opened her door, and she was standing right there, inches from my face. I jumped back, and she smiled. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. She whispered, "They told me about you. They said you have a daughter." I did have a daughter. She was 4. I asked Helen how she knew that, and she said, "The children know everything. They watch all of you. They see what you do when you think no one is looking." I reported it to my supervisor, but they brushed it off, said Helen must have overheard staff talking or seen a photo. But I never brought photos to work, and I never talked about my family there. A few days later, Helen was being transferred to another facility. As they were walking her out, she stopped right in front of me and said, "Your daughter is very pretty. I see her every night through her window. She sleeps with a stuffed rabbit, doesn't she?" My blood ran cold. My daughter did sleep with a stuffed rabbit, and her bedroom was on the 2nd floor. There was no way Helen could have known that. I asked her what she meant, and she said, "The children showed me. They show me everything." She was escorted out, and I never saw her again. When I got home that night, I went straight to my daughter's room. On the outside of the window, on the 2nd floor, were small handprints, like someone had been pressing their hands against the glass, looking in. We moved 2 months later. I never found out what happened to Helen, but sometimes, late at night, I still think about what she said about the children watching, and I wonder if they're still watching us. I worked as a home health aide for a few years, and one of my patients was an elderly man named Mr. Callahan. He lived alone in this big old house. He was in his 80s and needed help with the basics: bathing, cooking, cleaning, things like that. He seemed like a sweet old man at first, always polite, always grateful. But after a few weeks, I started finding things that bothered me. In his closet, I found boxes of women's jewelry, hundreds of pieces, necklaces, rings, bracelets, all tangled together. When I asked him about it, he said they were gifts from lady friends over the years. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Then I went into his basement and found a locked room. When I asked what was inside, he got angry, really angry, and told me never to go down there again. His reaction was so intense that I started getting suspicious. One day, while he was napping, I went back downstairs with a screwdriver and popped the lock. What I found made me call the police immediately. The room was full of photographs, hundreds of them, all of women. Most looked like they were taken without the women knowing, through windows, in parking lots, walking down the street. Some of the photos were so old, the paper was yellow and cracked. There were newspaper clippings about missing women dating back to the 50s and 60s. And there was a box filled with driver's licenses, at least 20 of them, all belonging to different women. The police arrested Mr. Callahan, and when they searched his property, they found remains buried in his backyard. 4 women, all reported missing between 1960 and 1985. Mr. Callahan confessed to killing them. He said he would watch them first, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, learning their routines. Then he would take them. He died in prison before his trial, and investigators believe there were more victims who were never found. I quit being a home health aide after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been taking care of a monster, helping him bathe, feeding him, while he kept trophies from his victims hidden in his home.